Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations of Steel. Broderick Brody. Harlow had always been a man of precision. The house on Oak Ridge Drive stood as testament to that fact. A modernist triumph of glass and steel nestled against the mountainside, overlooking the city he had once desperately wanted to escape. He designed and built it himself after the divorce, a physical manifestation of his rebirth. 5 years had passed since he'd stood in a courtroom watching as Veronica, his wife of 12 years, systematically dismantled their life together. She hadn't just taken his trust, she'd taken his dignity, spinning tales of emotional neglect while conveniently omitting her 6-month affair with Niles Porter, his former business partner. The morning air was crisp as Brody completed his 5-mile run, the same route he'd taken every day since moving to this secluded property. Structure had saved him when chaos threatened to consume him. He checked his watch, 6:03 a.m., 3 minutes behind schedule. His phone buzzed as he mounted the steps to his deck. The name on the screen made his jaw tighten. Lawrence Harlow. His father. "What do you want?" Brody answered, his voice as cold as the morning air. "Is that how you greet your father after 6 months?" Lawrence's voice carried the same self-righteous tone that had characterized their relationship for decades. "When that father sided with the woman who destroyed our family." "Yes. Aside from the other end. We need to talk, Broderick. In person. We have nothing to discuss. It's about the property in Oak Ridge. Your mother and I are coming by this afternoon." The property, his grandfather's estate, had been the start of everything. When his grandfather died, he'd left his substantial estate to Brody, bypassing Lawrence entirely. Lawrence had never forgiven either of them for it, and when Veronica had come crying to his parents during the divorce, they'd sided with her without hesitation. "Not happening," Brody replied. 3 o'clock, Broderick. "Be there or not, but we're coming." The line went dead. Brody stared out at the valley below, his sanctuary suddenly feeling vulnerable to invasion. He'd built this new life brick by brick, and no one, not his ex-wife, not his parents, would be allowed to threaten it. Inside, he found Margot Denton, his executive assistant, already setting up her laptop at the kitchen island. In her mid-30s, with an efficiency that bordered on telepathic, she'd been with him since he'd started over. "Your father?" she asked, not looking up from her screen. "They're coming here at 3. Something about the property." Margot's fingers paused over the keyboard. "Wanting to schedule an emergency meeting?" "No. I think it's time I heard what they have to say." He poured himself a black coffee. "What's on the agenda today?" "Meeting with the Silver Lake developers at 10. Lunch with Mayor Thomason at noon to discuss the Riverside revitalization. And Heron Acquisitions sent over the preliminary paperwork for the Parker Building downtown." The Parker Building, owned by Niles Porter's investment group. The symmetry wasn't lost on Brody. "Move the Silver Lake meeting to tomorrow. I need time to prepare for whatever my parents are bringing." By 2 o'clock, Brody had reviewed the Heron Acquisitions paperwork twice. The deal was straightforward: buy the Parker Building, renovate it, and flip it for a healthy profit. The fact that the sale would cost Niles Porter's company millions was just a bonus. The security system chimed at 2:57 p.m. His parents were nothing if not punctual in their intrusions. He opened the door to find not just his parents, but Veronica standing between them. "What is this?" he demanded, blocking the entrance. Lawrence Harlow, silver-haired and stiff-backed, even at 70, faced his son. "May we come in, Broderick? This concerns all of us." Brody stepped aside, his face betraying nothing as the three filed past him into the vast open-concept living area. His mother, Eleanor, elegant as always in her cashmere sweater and pearls, had the decency to look uncomfortable. Veronica, however, surveyed the house with unconcealed appreciation. "You've done well for yourself," she said, her voice carrying the slight southern drawl that had once charmed him. "What do you want?" Brody directed his question at his father. Lawrence cleared his throat. "As you know, the old estate has been sitting empty since your grandfather passed. The estate he left to me, you mean? Yes. Lawrence's jaw tightened. The thing is, Veronica and Niles are getting married. Brody stared at them, waiting for the connection. Eleanor stepped forward. They want to have the ceremony at the estate. It's where you and Veronica were married, and... Absolutely not. The words came out flat, final. It's not that simple, Lawrence continued. The estate is in trust until your 40th birthday. As trustee, I have certain discretionary powers. You can't be serious. Brody felt a coldness spreading through his chest. I'm not asking for your permission, Veronica interjected. The wedding is happening at the estate. Lawrence has already approved it. Brody met his father's gaze. And if I refuse to cooperate? The trust has provisions, Broderick. Provisions we'd rather not invoke. The threat hung in the air. The provisions his father referenced could divert portions of the trust if the primary beneficiary was deemed uncooperative or unstable, a relic of his grandfather's own complicated relationship with his family. When? A month from Saturday, Veronica replied. Just a small ceremony. 200 guests. 200, Brody repeated. At my house. The estate belongs to the family, Lawrence corrected. And Veronica is still family. Brody walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to the three intruders. Get out. Broderick, his mother began. Get out. After they left, Brody remained at the window, watching their cars disappear down the winding driveway. His phone buzzed with a text from Margot. Everything okay? He didn't respond. Instead, he dialed another number. Townsend, answered a gruff voice. It's Brody Harlow. I need your services. What kind of services are we talking about? The kind that require absolute discretion. Come by the house tonight. 9 o'clock. The die was cast. If they want a war, he'd give them one. Chapter 2. Sins of the Past. Drake Townsend arrived at precisely 9, his weathered face and cautious eyes speaking of a man who knew how to keep secrets. Former military intelligence. Now a private investigator with connections in places most people didn't know existed. Drink, Brody offered, pouring himself 2 fingers of bourbon. Just water. I like to stay sharp. Townsend settled into a leather armchair. What's this about Harlow? Brody laid out the situation. His ex-wife's upcoming wedding, his father's manipulation of the trust, and the unwanted ceremony planned for his grandfather's estate. So you want dirt on them, Townsend surmised. Leverage. I want everything. On all of them. Brody slid a flash drive across the coffee table. This has their basic information, but I want to know every secret, every weakness, every pressure point. Townsend pocketed the drive. This isn't cheap work. Money isn't an issue. Time is. I need comprehensive reports in 2 weeks. And what do you plan to do with this information? Brody's expression hardened. That's not your concern. It is if it involves breaking the law. I'm not looking to break laws, Townsend. I'm looking to break people. The investigator nodded. 2 weeks. I'll be in touch. After Townsend left, Brody opened his laptop and navigated to a folder labeled Contingencies. He'd started it the day after his divorce was finalized, a collection of information and resources for scenarios he hoped would never materialize. Tonight, he created a new subfolder, Wedding. The next morning, Brody canceled all his meetings and drove to the estate, a sprawling colonial manor nestled on 20 acres just outside the city limits. He hadn't been there since before the divorce, but his security codes still worked. Walking through the silent rooms, he was struck by how little had changed. The same antique furniture, the same oil paintings of stern-faced Harlows. Only the master bedroom showed signs of recent habitation. Lawrence and Eleanor must have been staying there occasionally. In the study, his grandfather's presence still lingered. Montgomery Harlow had been a titan in the construction industry, building half the city's skyline before retiring to focus on his true passion, collecting enemies. Montgomery had taught Brody that success wasn't just about building things. It was about outlasting those who wanted to tear you down. Brody settled behind the massive oak desk and opened the center drawer. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger, exactly where his grandfather had always kept it. The old man had been paranoid about computers, preferring to record his most sensitive information by hand. The ledger contained names, dates, and cryptic annotations spanning decades. Near the back, Brody found what he was looking for, a section titled Lawrence. His father's transgressions, meticulously documented by Montgomery. As he read, a coldness settled in Brody's chest. His father's betrayals went far deeper than he'd imagined, spanning years of embezzlement from family businesses and secret liaisons, including one with Veronica's mother years before Brody and Veronica had even met. The connections were dizzying. His phone vibrated. "Townsend, you're at the estate," the investigator said without preamble. "How did you know? I have your permission to track your movements, remember? Part of our arrangement." Brody had forgotten that detail. "I'm doing some research of my own. Find anything useful?" "Maybe. What about you?" "It's only been 12 hours, but I've got something interesting. Your ex-wife's fiancé, Niles Porter? He's been making regular payments to a woman named Tamara Walsh." The name meant nothing to Brody. "Blackmail?" "No. Child support. For a 10-year-old boy." Brody's mind raced. 10 years ago, he and Veronica had been trying to have a child of their own, with no success. The fertility treatments had taken a toll on their marriage, driving Veronica into depression and Brody into his work. Does Veronica know? Unknown at this time. But here's where it gets interesting. The payment started exactly 1 month after you and Porter dissolved your business partnership. The implications were clear. Niles had been leading a double life for years, possibly the entire time he'd known Brody. And now he wanted to marry Veronica in Brody's house. "Keep digging," Brody instructed. "Focus on Niles and this Tamara Walsh. I want to know everything." He hung up and returned to the ledger, flipping to the very last page. There, in his grandfather's spidery handwriting, was a note addressed to him. "Broderick, if you're reading this, you found yourself in a situation that requires the nuclear option. The combination to the vault is your birthday backwards, followed by mine. Use what you find there wisely. And remember, a Harlow never forgives, but he always collects." Montgomery. Brody stood and walked to the painting behind the desk, a dark landscape of a storm-tossed ship. Behind it lay a wall safe. He entered the combination, 6179-529-1837. The lock clicked and the door swung open. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten note with an offshore account number and password. Brody pocketed both, replaced the ledger, and locked the study behind him. Whatever his grandfather had left him, it was time to use it. On his way out, he paused in the grand foyer, imagining it filled with wedding guests. Veronica in white, Niles beaming, his parents playing the gracious hosts. The vision crystallized his resolve. They wouldn't just be denied their perfect day. They would be destroyed by it. Chapter 3. The Wheels in Motion. Townsend's reports arrived one by one over the next week, each more revealing than the last. Brody assembled them like puzzle pieces, creating a comprehensive picture of his enemy's vulnerabilities. Lawrence Harlow, it seemed, had been siphoning money from the family trust for years, small amounts that wouldn't trigger audits but would accumulate significantly over time. He'd used the funds to maintain a lavish lifestyle while presenting the image of prudent financial management to the family. Eleanor, while not directly involved in the embezzlement, had her own secrets, a 2-year emotional affair with her tennis instructor that Lawrence had discovered and then used as leverage to keep her compliant in his schemes. Niles Porter's situation was the most complex. His son with Tamara Walsh, a boy named Camden, had been diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder requiring expensive treatments. The child support payments were substantial, driving Niles to increasingly desperate financial maneuvers. His company, Porter Investments, was over-leveraged and surviving largely on reputation. Veronica, meanwhile, had been living well beyond her means since the divorce. The settlement had been generous, but not generous enough for the lifestyle she maintained. She'd taken loans from Lawrence that had further entangled the family finances. Most crucially, Townsend had uncovered the true motivation behind the wedding location. The estate wasn't just a symbolic venue. It was collateral. Niles needed a substantial loan to keep his company afloat, and Lawrence had agreed to leverage the estate to secure it, something he could only do if he maintained control through the trust. The wedding was a smokescreen for a business transaction that would potentially drain millions from Brody's inheritance. Armed with this knowledge, Brody met with Preston Chambers, the family's longtime attorney, at his downtown office. "This is highly irregular," Chambers said, reviewing the documents Brody had brought. "Lawrence has overstepped his authority as trustee. Can he be removed?" Chambers adjusted his glasses. "Possibly, but it would take time. The wedding is in 3 weeks. What if I appeared to cooperate?" Brody suggested. "Let them think I've accepted the situation while we prepare the legal challenge." "That could work. It would also give us time to document any further breaches of fiduciary duty." Brody nodded. "Draft the paperwork, but don't file anything yet. I'll let you know when to move." That evening, Brody called his father. "I've been thinking about our conversation," he said, injecting a note of resignation into his voice. "I don't like it, but I understand the estate technically belongs to the family." Lawrence's surprise was audible. "Well, I'm glad you've come to your senses. I have some conditions. I want to be involved in the planning. It's still my property, regardless of the trust." Of course, Lawrence agreed too quickly. "Veronica will be delighted." The next day, Brody met with Veronica at a cafe downtown. She arrived looking every inch the blushing bride-to-be, her blonde hair professionally styled, her engagement ring ostentatiously large. "I appreciate your change of heart," she said, stirring her latte. "It means a lot to Niles and me." "Let's be clear," Brody replied. "I'm doing this for my parents, not for you." Her smile faltered. "Always so direct." "That was part of the problem, you know. One of many, apparently." He slid a folder across the table. "My conditions. I want to approve all vendors, all decorations, all security arrangements. Nothing happens on that property without my knowledge." Veronica scanned the document. "This is excessive. It's non-negotiable. Either I'm involved completely, or I fight this with everything I have." She studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. "Fine, but no sabotage, Brody. This is important to me. I wouldn't dream of it." He signaled the waiter for the check. "One more thing. I want to meet with Niles." "Why?" "To clear the air. If we're going to make this work, old resentments need to be put aside." Veronica looked skeptical, but nodded. "I'll arrange it." 2 days later, Brody sat across from Niles Porter at an upscale steakhouse. Time had not been kind to his former partner. Stress had carved lines around his eyes, and his once athletic frame had softened. "This is unexpected," Niles said after they ordered. "I thought you'd fight the wedding location tooth and nail." "I considered it," Brody admitted. "But what would be the point? The past is the past." Just like that, after everything, Brody cut into his steak. "I've moved on, Niles. Built a new life, new business, new perspective. I never meant to hurt you, you know. With Veronica, it just happened. While we were still partners. While I was still her husband." Brody's voice remained calm, but his eyes hardened. "Water under the bridge now." "Right." Niles shifted uncomfortably. "About the wedding. I've already spoken with Veronica. I've agreed to her having it at the estate, but I'll be overseeing the arrangements." "That's not necessary. We've already hired a planner." "My house, my rules," Brody said, the steel returning to his tone. "Or would you prefer I reconsider my cooperation entirely?" Niles relented. "Fine, but please keep it civil with Veronica. She's stressed enough as it is." "Of course." Brody signaled for the bill. "Oh, and Niles, congratulations on fatherhood." Niles froze. "What?" "Camden. Seems like a great kid from what I hear." The color drained from Niles's face. "How do you? I make it my business to know everything about the people in my life. A lesson I learned too late with you and Veronica." Brody stood. "See you at the wedding." As he left the restaurant, Brody texted Townsend, "Move to phase 2. That night, he plugged his grandfather's USB drive into his computer. It contained thousands of files, financial records, correspondence, and most valuably, recordings. Montgomery Harlow had apparently been in the habit of recording his business dealings for decades. One folder stood out, Lawrence Contingencies. Inside was a video file labeled with a date from 15 years earlier. Brody played it. The video showed Lawrence in the estate's study, arguing heatedly with a man Brody recognized as Robert Shepard, once his father's closest business associate before a mysterious falling out. You can't just cut me out. Shepard shouted. I helped build this from nothing. The contract gives me full authority, Lawrence replied. Your services are no longer required. I'll fight this, Lawrence. I'll tell everyone what really happened with the Wilson contract. Lawrence's face darkened. You do that, and I'll make sure Margaret finds out about your arrangement with her sister. The threat silenced Shepard. The video continued for another 5 minutes, documenting Lawrence's systematic dismantling of his partner's claims, using blackmail and threats that constituted clear business fraud. Brody sat back, a cold smile forming. His grandfather hadn't just been documenting Lawrence's betrayals. He'd been collecting ammunition. The next morning, Brody called the wedding planner Veronica had hired and arranged a meeting at the estate. Over the next 2 weeks, he inserted himself into every aspect of the wedding preparations, approving vendors, reviewing seating arrangements, and inspecting security protocols. To all outward appearances, he was being remarkably cooperative, even generous. Veronica grew increasingly relaxed, believing his change of heart was genuine. Only Margot knew the truth. She'd been helping him coordinate with Townsend and another half-dozen specialists he'd hired for what they now simply called the event. They're suspecting nothing? She asked, reviewing the latest wedding timeline. They're too focused on their own agendas to see the bigger picture, Brody replied. Lawrence is fixated on the loan he plans to secure using the estate. Niles is desperate to save his company, and Veronica just wants her perfect day. And what exactly happens when their perfect day arrives? Brody showed her the detailed plan he'd developed. Her eyes widened as she read. This is extreme, she said finally. It's proportional. They tried to use my home, my inheritance, to fund their lies. Actions have consequences. Some might call this revenge. I call it justice. Are you with me or not? Margot considered the question. She'd been with Brody through the darkest days after his divorce, had seen firsthand what Veronica and Niles's betrayal had done to him. She nodded slowly. I'm with you. But be careful. Revenge has a way of consuming the avenger. Brody's phone chimed with a message from Townsend. All assets in place. Ready when you are. 3 days before the wedding, Brody received a call from his mother. Broderick. Eleanor's voice was strained. I need to speak with you. Alone. They met at a quiet park the next morning. Eleanor looked tired, the carefully maintained facade of the perfect society wife showing cracks. I want you to know, she began, that I didn't agree with your father about the wedding. I told him it was wrong to force this on you, but you didn't stop him. I couldn't. Her hands twisted in her lap. There are things you don't understand about our marriage, about your father. I understand more than you think, Mother. Brody's voice softened slightly. I know about the tennis instructor. I know about the missing money from the trust. Eleanor paled. Ow! It doesn't matter. What matters is what happens next. He leaned closer. You have a choice to make. Either stand with Lawrence on Saturday, or stand with me. What are you planning, Broderick? Justice. Nothing more, nothing less. Eleanor searched his face. You're so like your grandfather. He never forgave either. He taught me well. Will I be implicated in whatever you're planning? Brody stood. That depends entirely on what you do on Saturday. As he walked away, Brody felt a momentary pang of guilt. His mother had been a secondary player in the betrayal, manipulated by Lawrence as much as anyone. But she had made her choices, and choices had consequences. The day before the wedding, Brody made his final preparations. The estate had been transformed for the ceremony. White chairs arranged on the rolling lawn, a flower-covered arch positioned to frame the sunset, twinkling lights strung through the trees. It was beautiful, perfect, exactly what Veronica had always wanted, and the ideal setting for what Brody had planned. That night, as he reviewed the final details with Townsend and Margot, his phone rang. Veronica. Cold feet, he answered. I just wanted to thank you, she said, her voice slightly slurred, for being so understanding. About everything. Don't mention it. I mean it, Brody. You could have made this impossible. Instead, you've been almost supportive. Get some sleep, Veronica. Big day tomorrow. Do you ever think about what went wrong with us? She asked suddenly. No, he lied. I don't. After hanging up, he turned to his companions. Everyone clear on their roles tomorrow? They nodded. Then let's get some rest. Tomorrow will be a day to remember. Chapter 4. The Wedding Planner. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, as if the universe itself approved of what was to come. Brody arrived at the estate early, before any of the vendors, and made a final inspection of the grounds. In the kitchen, he found Preston Chambers waiting with a stack of legal documents. "Everything's prepared," the attorney reported. "Filed and ready to be executed on your signal." "Good. What about the other matter?" Chambers handed over a sealed envelope. "The judge signed the order this morning. It becomes effective the moment you say the word." Brody tucked the envelope into his inside jacket pocket. "Thank you, Preston, for everything. I served your grandfather for 30 years, the older man replied. "He would approve of what you're doing, even the parts that skirt the law." Chambers smiled thinly. "Especially those parts." As the attorney left, the first of the vendors arrived, the catering team, followed by the florists making last-minute adjustments to their elaborate arrangements. Brody greeted each with practiced congeniality, the gracious host preparing for his ex-wife's wedding. At noon, Niles Porter arrived with his groomsmen. He looked tense, his smile forced as he nodded to Brody. "Everything looks amazing," he said, surveying the transformed grounds. "Only the best for my ex-wife and former business partner," Brody replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The bridal suite is prepared upstairs. Your room is down the hall from it." "Thanks. And Brody, I really do appreciate this. I know it can't be easy. Water under the bridge." Brody repeated his mantra. "Oh, one thing. There's been a slight change to the seating arrangement. I've moved the Walsh family to the front row on your side." Niles went rigid. "What did you say?" "Tamara and Camden Walsh. They RSVP'd yesterday. I assumed you'd want them close." "Brody, what the hell are you doing?" Niles hissed, grabbing Brody's arm. Brody looked pointedly at Niles's hand until he released his grip. "I'm just accommodating all the guests. Isn't that what a good host does?" "They weren't invited." "Really? That's odd, because I have their acceptance right here." Brody produced an RSVP card from his pocket. "Don't worry, I've handled everything. They're even staying in the guest house tonight." Niles's face had gone ashen. "You need to uninvite them." "Now, I'm afraid that's impossible. The caterers have already accounted for them." Brody checked his watch. "Shouldn't you be getting ready? Veronica will be here in an hour." As Niles stormed off, Townsend approached from the garden. "The Walsh family has arrived. They're settling into the guest house now, and they understand their role." "Completely." Tamara was surprisingly amenable once I explained what Porter has been doing with the trust fund he set up for Camden. "Which is?" "Draining it. The boys' medical treatments are being covered by state assistance, while Porter has been using the trust fund to shore up his failing company." Brody nodded. "Make sure they're comfortable and visible during the ceremony." At 1 o'clock, Veronica arrived with her bridal party. She looked radiant, her nervousness masked by excitement as she swept into the house, barely acknowledging Brody. "Everything is just as we planned," the wedding planner assured her, leading the group upstairs. "Everything is just as I planned," Brody murmured to himself. The guests began arriving at 2, filling the rows of white chairs on the lawn. Lawrence and Eleanor greeted them, playing the roles of proud parents of the bride. Though Eleanor's smile seemed strained, her eyes occasionally darting to Brody with unspoken questions. At 2:30, Brody received a text from Margot. Phase 1 complete. Packages delivered. He responded, "Initiate Phase 2. By 3 o'clock, the garden was filled with 200 elegantly dressed guests. The string quartet played softly as the wedding party began to assemble at the back of the aisle. Niles stood under the flower-covered arch, visibly sweating despite the mild temperature. From his position near the house, Brody could see Tamara and Camden Walsh seated prominently in the front row, a striking woman in her 30s and a solemn-faced boy who bore an unmistakable resemblance to Niles. Lawrence approached Brody, champagne in hand. "I must admit, son, you surprised me. I didn't think you'd be so accommodating." "Life is full of surprises, father, some more pleasant than others." "Indeed." Lawrence raised his glass. "To new beginnings and fitting ends." Brody clinked his water glass against the champagne flute. The music changed, signaling the start of the ceremony. Bridesmaids and groomsmen proceeded down the aisle, followed by Veronica on Lawrence's arm. She was stunning in her designer gown, her smile radiant as she approached her soon-to-be husband. Just as they reached the arch, Brody slipped away, entering the house through a side door. In the study, he found Margot monitoring a series of tablet screens showing different areas of the property. "All in position?" he asked. "Yes. The files have been distributed to the key guests, including the mayor and Niles's investors. Townsend has the video ready to play at your signal." Brody checked his phone. 3:15 p.m. Right on schedule. Any sign of trouble? Niles keeps looking at the Walsh family, but he's holding it together. "Your father is getting text messages every few minutes, probably from the bank about the loan." Brody nodded. "And our special guest arrived 10 minutes ago, waiting in the kitchen as instructed." "Perfect." Brody straightened his tie and headed for the door. Showtime. Outside, the ceremony was reaching its climax. The officiant was asking if anyone knew of any reason why Niles and Veronica should not be joined in matrimony. The traditional silence followed. Then Brody stepped forward. "Actually, I have several reasons." A murmur ran through the crowd. Veronica turned, her face flushing with anger. "Brody, what are you doing?" she hissed. "Fulfilling my duties as host," he replied, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "A good host ensures that all his guests have the information they need." He signaled to Townsend, who activated a series of screens that had been discreetly positioned around the garden. They flickered to life, displaying a mosaic of incriminating documents. Lawrence's embezzlement records, Niles's misappropriation of his son's trust fund, financial statements showing Veronica's mounting debts. "What is this?" Lawrence demanded, his face purpling. "This," Brody announced, "is the truth. Something in short supply among the Harlow family lately." The murmuring grew louder as guests began examining the files that had been placed on their chairs during the ceremony. Personalized packets containing information relevant to each recipient. Niles's investors received details of his company's precarious financial position. The mayor found evidence of Lawrence's tax evasion. Veronica's friends discovered the extent of her deception about her lifestyle. "Stop this immediately," Lawrence shouted, advancing on Brody. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Father." Brody held up his phone. "In fact, we're just getting started." He pressed a button, and the screens changed to show the video of Lawrence threatening Robert Shepard 15 years earlier. The audio played clearly across the garden, Lawrence's younger voice detailing his fraudulent business practices for all to hear. In the front row, Tamara Walsh stood up, drawing Camden close to her side. "Is that him?" she asked, pointing at Niles. "Is that your father who's been lying to us for 10 years? The boy nodded, his eyes wide. "Niles!" Veronica turned to her fiancé, confusion and dawning horror on her face. What is she talking about? Niles's face had gone gray. "I can explain. He has a son," Brody announced to the gathering. "A 10-year-old boy he's been hiding from everyone, including my ex-wife. A boy whose medical trust fund he's been systematically draining to prop up his failing business." "That's a lot," Niles shouted, but his protest sounded hollow even to himself. "Is it?" Brody gestured to Damara. "Would you like to show everyone the DNA test, Ms. Walsh? Or perhaps the bank statements?" The wedding had dissolved into chaos. Guests were standing, pointing, whispering. Lawrence was attempting to shut down the screens, while Eleanor sat heavily in a chair, her face in her hands. Veronica stood frozen at the altar, her perfect day shattered around her. "You planned this," she accused Brody, her voice breaking. "You set us up." "I simply created the opportunity for the truth to come out," Brody replied. "The rest you managed all on your own." "Sir," Townsend called from the side. "It's time for the final phase." Brody nodded and addressed the crowd again. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption, but there's one more thing you should know." He pulled the envelope from his pocket and removed the document inside. "As of 10 o'clock this morning, by order of Judge Hamilton, I am the sole trustee of the Harlow family estate. My father has been removed due to his documented financial malfeasance." Lawrence lunged for the paper. "You can't do this." "It's already done." Brody sidestepped his father easily. And as my first act as trustee, I'm changing the locks. Everyone has 30 minutes to vacate the premises. Security personnel emerge from various positions around the garden, forming a perimeter. Not threatening, but unmistakably present. You can't throw everyone out. Veronica cried. We have guests. No, Veronica. I have guests. Unwanted ones. Brody checked his watch. 29 minutes now. As the stunned crowd began to disperse, some angry, others embarrassed, others secretly delighted by the drama, Brody felt a hand on his arm. His mother. Was all this necessary? Eleanor asked, her voice low. You could have stopped the wedding without the public humiliation. Brody regarded her coolly. They didn't just want to use my home, Mother. They wanted to steal from me, from the legacy grandfather left me. This wasn't about a wedding. It was about consequences. You're just like him. She didn't specify whether she meant Montgomery or Lawrence. I'm exactly who I needed to become. Brody turned away, signaling to Townsend to begin escorting people to their cars. The garden emptied quickly, leaving only the core players in the drama. Brody, Lawrence, Eleanor, Veronica, and Niles. The last guests to leave were Tamara and Camden Walsh, the boy casting a final curious glance at Niles as they were led to a waiting car. Was that really necessary? Niles demanded once they were gone. Bringing them here? The boy has nothing to do with this. The boy has everything to do with this, Brody replied. He's the living proof of your character, or lack thereof. I've supported him his entire life. With money, perhaps. Never with your name or your presence. Brody turned to Veronica. Did you know about Camden? She shook her head, her makeup streaked with tears. How could you do this to me? On my wedding day, the same way you did it to me, by putting myself first. Brody gestured toward the house. Now get your things. You have 20 minutes. As they trudged toward the house, Lawrence remained, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. This isn't over, Broderick. Actually, it is. Brody held up his phone, showing a series of news alerts already spreading across social media. Your reputation is destroyed. Your business associates are fleeing. The mayor has already issued a statement distancing himself from you. You've made an enemy today. No, Father. I've neutralized one. Brody started toward the house, then paused. Oh, and don't bother trying to access any of your accounts tomorrow. They've been frozen pending investigation. The look of shock on Lawrence's face was worth everything it had cost to arrange the necessary financial holds. Brody left him standing alone on the lawn, surrounded by the debris of the failed wedding, scattered flowers, abandoned programs, half-empty champagne glasses. Inside, Veronica was gathering her things from the bridal suite, her bridesmaids having fled at the first sign of scandal. When Brody appeared in the doorway, she rounded on him. You could have just said no to the wedding, she spat. You didn't have to destroy us. When you came to my house with my parents, demanding to use my property for your wedding to my former partner, what did you think would happen? Brody leaned against the door frame. I would just roll over and take it? After everything. I thought you'd moved on, that you'd built this new, successful life and left the past behind. I'd have built a new life. But I never forgot who took the old one from me. Brody checked his watch. 15 minutes. As he turned to leave, Veronica called after him. He doesn't love me, does he? Niles. Brody paused. I don't think Niles Porter loves anyone but himself. That's something we both learned too late. In the main hall, Niles was arguing with Townsend, demanding the return of his phone, which had been deactivated upon his arrival as part of the security protocol. Your phone is in your car, Brody informed him, along with some interesting news about Porter Investments. Seems the board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Niles went still. What have you done? I simply made sure your investors received accurate information about the company's finances. Information you've been concealing from them. Brody smiled coldly. It's called transparency, Niles. Something you should have practiced years ago. You've ruined me. No, you ruined yourself. I just made sure everyone knew about it. Brody gestured to the door. Your time is up. Get out of my house. As Niles slunk away, Lawrence and Eleanor descended the stairs, their overnight bags in hand. Lawrence's face was set in stone, but Eleanor's held a hint of something else. Regret, perhaps, or resignation. I hope you're satisfied, Broderick, Lawrence said. You've torn this family apart. You did that years ago, Brody replied. I'm just settling accounts. Eleanor stepped forward, placing a hand on Brody's cheek. Whatever we did to you, we're still your parents. Biology isn't destiny, Mother. Actions define family, not blood. He gently removed her hand. Goodbye. As they left, Margot emerged from the study. They're all gone. Security is changing the locks now. Brody nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the day. And the other arrangements? In progress. The financial holds will take effect at midnight. The press release goes out at 9 tomorrow morning. And Judge Hamilton has scheduled a hearing for next week to formalize your control of the trust. Good. Brody walked to the windows overlooking the garden, now being dismantled by the staff. What about our special guest? Still waiting in the kitchen. She's been quite patient. Send her in. A moment later, Brody heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find a slender woman in her 60s with silver-streaked dark hair and knowing eyes. Catherine, he greeted her. Thank you for coming. Catherine Shepard, Robert Shepard's widow, nodded. I wouldn't have missed it. Robert would have loved seeing Lawrence finally face consequences. He waited too long to fight back. Yes, he did. She studied Brody's face. You're not making the same mistake. No, but the fight isn't over yet. Catherine smiled. Then it's a good thing you have allies. She handed him a flash drive. Everything Robert documented over the years. Use it well. Brody pocketed the drive. I will. As Catherine left, Brody remained at the window, watching as the last traces of the wedding were cleared away. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn where, hours earlier, his enemies had gathered to further exploit him. They had come expecting a wedding. Instead, they had witnessed an execution, the systematic dismantling of their plans, their reputations, their futures. And Brody was just getting started. Chapter 5. The Aftermath. The morning after the wedding disaster, Brody sat in his downtown office, watching the fallout unfold on multiple screens. Porter Investments' stock had plummeted 30% in pre-market trading. The mayor had issued a statement distancing himself from Lawrence Harlow. Social media was ablaze with eyewitness accounts from wedding guests, each more dramatic than the last. Margot entered with 2 coffees, setting one on his desk. The judge called. He wants to move the hearing up to tomorrow. Good. The sooner I have full legal control, the better. There's something else. She hesitated. Veronica has been trying to reach you. She's called 6 times this morning. Brody considered this. What does she want? She wouldn't say, just that it's urgent. He tapped his fingers on the desk. Set up a meeting. Neutral ground. That cafe near the courthouse. Are you sure that's wise? No, but I'm curious. He turned back to the screens. What about Lawrence? Nothing directly from him, but his attorney reached out to Preston. They're talking settlement already. No settlements. No compromises. Brody's voice hardened. He tried to steal from me. He gets nothing. Margot nodded, making a note. The Walsh family checked out of the hotel this morning. Tamara asked me to thank you. For what? For the college fund you set up for Camden. That was unexpected. Brody shrugged. The boy is innocent in all this. He shouldn't suffer for his father's sins. Margot studied him. Sometimes you surprise me, Brody. Don't get sentimental. It was strategic. Securing Tamara's continued cooperation might be valuable. Of course. But her small smile suggested she didn't entirely believe his explanation. After she left, Brody accessed the security feeds from the estate. The grounds were quiet now, all evidence of the aborted wedding removed. He switched to the interior cameras, watching as the security team continued their sweep for any surveillance devices Lawrence might have planted. His phone buzzed with a text from Townsend. Movement on the Porter front. Board voted this morning. He's out. Brody allowed himself a small smile. Niles had built his company on charm and connections, with a healthy dose of financial sleight of hand. Without those things, he was nothing. At noon, Brody arrived at the cafe to find Veronica already waiting, a far cry from the radiant bride of yesterday. Her eyes were shadowed, her posture defeated. Thank you for meeting me, she said as he sat down. You have 10 minutes. What's so urgent? She pushed a folder across the table. Niles is ruined. The board removed him this morning. His assets are frozen, pending investigation. He can't even pay his son's medical bills. That sounds like Niles's problem, not mine. It's my problem too. Veronica's voice cracked. We're married, Brody. He stared at her. What? We got married last week. At the courthouse. The wedding at the estate was just for show, for the families and investors. She looked down at her hands. I'm legally tied to a man who's about to be indicted for financial fraud. Brody felt an unexpected wave of something. Not quite pity, but a distant cousin to it. Why are you telling me this? Because I need your help. She slid another document across the table. This is a draft annulment filing. My attorney prepared it. If you could not oppose it, the annulment could go through before Niles's legal troubles fully materialize. And why would I help you? Because despite everything, we were married for 12 years. Because you loved me once. Brody studied the document. An annulment requires grounds. What are you claiming? Fraud. Veronica's laugh was bitter. Ironic, isn't it? He defrauded me by concealing his child, his financial crimes, his entire life. And if I help you, then I disappear. From this city, from your life. Completely. Brody considered the offer. Veronica free from Niles served no strategic purpose, but her disappearance would be a clean break for all involved. I'll need something in return, he said finally. What? A full accounting of every conversation you had with my parents during and after our divorce. Every promise they made, every plan they discussed. Veronica hesitated only briefly. Done. I'll have my attorney draw up a statement. Not your attorney. Mine. Brody stood. Preston Chambers will contact you this afternoon. You'll tell him everything, under oath and on video. And then you'll support the annulment? I won't oppose it. That's all I'm offering. She nodded, relief evident in her posture. Thank you, Brody. Don't thank me. This isn't kindness. It's efficiency. He buttoned his jacket. One last thing. Was any of it real? Us. Veronica's eyes met his, and for once, he saw no calculation there. The beginning was. Before the pressure, before the fertility treatments, before everything got so complicated. She sighed. We made each other worse, Brody. Some people do that to each other, even when they don't mean to. He nodded once, accepting the assessment. Goodbye, Veronica. The next day, Brody stood before Judge Hamilton. The final documentation, transferring full control of the trust to him, spread across the table. Mr. Harlow, the judge said, the evidence of your father's mismanagement is compelling. But I must ask, are you certain you wish to proceed with criminal charges? Family matters are often better resolved privately. With respect, Your Honor, this stopped being a family matter when my father attempted to defraud me of my inheritance. Brody's voice was steady. There must be consequences. The judge sighed. Very well. The trust is officially transferred to your control, with all previous trustees removed. The criminal referrals will proceed accordingly. As Brody left the courthouse, he found Catherine Shepard waiting on the steps. It's done, she asked. The first part, yes. Lawrence will face charges next week. Brody fell into step beside her. Your husband would have appreciated the symmetry. Robert always said Lawrence would destroy himself eventually. Catherine's smile was sad. He just didn't live to see it. About that, I've been reviewing the circumstances of your husband's death. The car accident that killed him. Brody chose his words carefully. There are inconsistencies in the police report. Catherine stopped walking. What are you saying? I'm saying that Lawrence Harlow's vindictiveness might extend further than financial sabotage. He handed her a folder. Townsend found these photos in my grandfather's files. They were taken the day before the accident. Catherine's hands trembled as she opened the folder, revealing pictures of Lawrence meeting with a man later identified as the mechanic who had worked on Robert Shepard's car just before the fatal crash. I always suspected, she whispered, but I could never prove it. We can now. Brody's voice was gentle but firm. If you're willing. She squared her shoulders. What do you need from me? A statement. Your suspicions at the time. Any odd behavior from Lawrence after Robert's death. And then we add it to the case building against him. Brody's expression darkened. He won't just lose his reputation and his money. He'll lose his freedom. That evening, Brody met Townsend at a quiet bar downtown. The investigator looked tired but satisfied. Porter's been formally charged, he reported. Securities fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion. He's looking at 20 years, minimum. And Lawrence? The DA is reviewing the evidence now, including the new material about Shepard's death. It's circumstantial, but compelling when viewed alongside everything else. Brody nodded. And my mother? Townsend hesitated. She's cleared out her personal accounts. Purchased a ticket to France. Leaves tomorrow morning. Let her go. She was more victim than perpetrator. Brody sipped his whiskey. What about you? Ready for a vacation after all this? Maybe, though I get the feeling your war isn't over yet. The major battles are won. What remains is mopping up operations. Brody smiled thinly. I've learned that vengeance is best served over time, in carefully measured doses. Later that night, as Brody stood on the deck of his mountain home, overlooking the city lights below, he felt a strange hollowness. The satisfaction of his revenge was real, but transient. In its wake came questions. What would Montgomery Harlow have thought of his grandson's actions? Not the vengeance itself. His grandfather would have approved of that, but the totality of it. The ruthlessness. The collateral damage. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It's Tamara Walsh. Camden's asking about you. About what happens next. Brody stared at the message, unsure how to respond. The boy, innocent in all this, yet forever marked by the sins of his father. What had happened next for children caught in the crossfire of adult betrayals? Before he could formulate a reply, another message came through. He wanted me to thank you for the college fund and for telling the truth about his dad. Something tightened in Brody's chest. Tell him the truth is always worth fighting for, he replied, even when it hurts. He pocketed the phone and turned back toward the house. There was still work to be done. The estate needed attention now that it was fully his. His business required refocusing after weeks of distraction. And there were still threads of his revenge to manage, ensuring Lawrence's prosecution proceeded, monitoring Niles's legal troubles, verifying Veronica's departure from the city. But tonight, he would allow himself this moment of quiet reflection. Tomorrow, the battle would continue. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. 1 month after the wedding debacle, Brody sat in the gallery of courtroom 302, watching as Lawrence Harlow stood to receive his sentence. The trial had been swift, the evidence overwhelming. Financial fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit fraud, and most damning of all, evidence suggesting his involvement in Robert Shepard's death. Lawrence's attorney had fought for leniency, citing his client's age and community standing. The prosecutor had countered with evidence of decades of ruthless behavior, of lives systematically destroyed through Lawrence's machinations. The judge's expression was grave as he spoke. Lawrence Harlow, you have betrayed not only your family's trust, but the trust of this community. The court sentences you to 20 years imprisonment, with no possibility of parole for 12 years. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Lawrence's face drained of color as the bailiff approached to take him into custody. Your Honor, Lawrence called out desperately, my son. This was all his doing, a vendetta to destroy me. The judge's gaze shifted to Brody, who maintained his composure. Mr. Harlow, your son provided evidence of your crimes. He did not commit them for you. The gavel came down. Court is adjourned. As Lawrence was led away, he locked eyes with Brody. No words were exchanged, but none were needed. The final battle between father and son had been fought and decided. Outside the courthouse, Catherine Shepard waited, a black umbrella shielding her from the light rain. It's done, Brody told her, joining her under the umbrella. 20 years, she mused. Robert's been gone 15. He won't live to see Lawrence free again. No, he won't. Brody offered his arm. Can I drive you home? Actually, I was hoping we could talk. About what comes next. They found a quiet cafe near the courthouse. Catherine stirred her tea thoughtfully before speaking. You've won, Broderick. Lawrence is imprisoned. Niles is ruined. Veronica is gone. She studied his face. What will you do now? Rebuild, he said simply. The estate needs work. My company has project pending. Life goes on. Without family? Without connection? Brody's jaw tightened. I have connections. business associates, colleagues. That's not what I mean, and you know it. Catherine's voice was gentle but firm. Revenge is a powerful motivator, but a poor foundation for a life. I'm not looking for advice on how to live, Catherine. No, but perhaps you need it anyway. She reached into her handbag and withdrew an envelope. This arrived for me yesterday. From Eleanor. Brody stiffened. His mother had indeed fled to France after the wedding, leaving no forwarding address, no contact information. He'd made no effort to find her. What does she want? To explain. About Lawrence, about their marriage. About you. Catherine slid the envelope across the table. She asked me to give you this when the time was right. I think that time is now. Reluctantly, Brody took the envelope. It was heavy, containing what felt like several sheets of paper. Have you read it? No, it's not addressed to me. Catherine finished her tea. But whatever it says, remember that understanding doesn't require forgiveness. It only requires willingness to see. After she left, Brody sat alone, the unopened letter before him. Part of him wanted to tear it up, to maintain the clean break he'd engineered. Another part, smaller, quieter, wanted to understand what had driven his mother to abandon him when he needed her most. He slipped the envelope into his jacket pocket. Not now. Not here. That evening, Margot brought updates on the remaining threads of his revenge. Niles Porter had accepted a plea deal, agreeing to testify against former associates in exchange for a reduced sentence of 7 years. Veronica had indeed left the city, relocating to Seattle where she had family. The annulment had been granted, her brief marriage to Niles erased from legal record, if not from memory. And what about the Walsh family? Brody asked. Tamara found a new specialist for Camden using the funds you provided. His treatment is progressing well. Margot hesitated. She's asked if you would consider meeting with them. The boy has questions only you can answer. Brody frowned. About what? About his father. About why everything happened the way it did. I'm not a therapist, Margot. No, but you're the only person who knows the whole story. And children need stories, even difficult ones, to make sense of their lives. Brody thought of his own childhood, of the carefully constructed narrative his parents had created about their perfect family. How that narrative had crumbled under the weight of reality. I'll think about it, he said finally. Later, alone in his study, Brody finally opened Eleanor's letter. It was indeed several pages, written in his mother's elegant hand. My dearest Broderick, it began. If you're reading this, then Catherine has deemed it the right time to give you my explanation. Not excuses, I have none, but perhaps context for the choices I made that hurt you so deeply. I married your father when I was 22, fresh from college, and dazzled by his confidence, his ambition, his absolute certainty that the world would bend to his will. It was only later that I realized such certainty often masks profound insecurity. The first signs of who he truly was came after Montgomery cut him out of significant portions of the family business, citing Lawrence's reckless decisions. Your father never forgave him, or you, when Montgomery made you his heir. I should have left then, but there were threats, financial entanglements, and later, concerns for your welfare. Lawrence had a talent for making leaving seem impossible, even as staying became unbearable. When Veronica came to us during your divorce, I recognized in her the same trapped expression I'd worn for decades. That doesn't excuse my betrayal of you. Nothing could. But in her desperation, I saw my own reflected back at me, and I made the wrong choice out of misplaced empathy. The wedding was Lawrence's idea, a final punishment for both you and Montgomery's memory. By then, I was too beaten down to resist effectively. I am ashamed of my weakness, but will no longer apologize for my survival. I don't ask for your forgiveness, Broderick. I only ask that you understand that not everyone has your strength, your capacity to fight back. Some of us simply endure until we can escape. I'm rebuilding my life now, learning who Eleanor might be without Lawrence's shadow. Perhaps one day, if you're willing, I can know the man you've become without the distortion of your father's influence. With enduring love, despite everything, your mother. Brody read the letter twice, then set it aside, his emotions a complex tangle. There was anger still, certainly, but also something unexpected, a thread of recognition. Eleanor, like him, had been shaped by Lawrence's manipulations. Unlike him, she had bent rather than broken. His phone chimed with a message from Townsend. Final report on the Shepard investigation submitted to authorities. Case officially reopened. Another piece of justice falling into place. Another account settled. Yet the satisfaction felt different now. More subdued, more complicated. Was this what Catherine had meant about revenge being a poor foundation? Once the accounts were settled, what remained? Brody opened his laptop and navigated to the folder labeled contingencies. So many files, so many backup plans for scenarios both likely and remote. Was this all that remained of Montgomery Harlow's legacy? This capacity for calculating the angles, for turning human relationships into strategic equations? On impulse, he created a new folder, Reconstruction. Inside, he placed a single document, a business proposal for a foundation to support children with rare genetic disorders, with Camden Walsh as its first beneficiary. It wasn't forgiveness. Brody Harlow didn't forgive betrayal. But perhaps there was a middle path between vengeance and absolution, a space where understanding could exist without surrender, where new structures could rise from the ashes of the old. The next morning, Brody called Tamara Walsh. "I understand Camden has questions," he said without preamble. "I'm willing to meet with him." "He'll be glad to hear that," Tamara replied. "When?" "This weekend. At the estate." Brody paused. "There's something else. I'm establishing a foundation for children with conditions like Camden's. I like your input on how it should operate." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "Why?" Tamara finally asked. "Why do this for us?" "Not for you," Brody corrected. "For Camden. And for others like him." "But why? After everything?" "Because building is harder than destroying," Brody interrupted. "And I need to remember how to build." After hanging up, Brody stood at his office window, looking out over the city. His father was in prison. His former partner was disgraced. His ex-wife had vanished to a new life. The revenge was complete, the ledger balanced. Yet he remained, holding the empty chalice of victory, facing the vastness of what came next. The estate needed restoration. The foundation needed structure. Camden needed answers. And Brody Harlow, the man who had orchestrated the perfect revenge, needed a new blueprint for the life that remained. Chapter 7. The Invitation. 6 months after Lawrence Harlow's sentencing, the Harlow estate was transformed. Gone were the formal gardens and stuffy interiors that had characterized the property for generations. In their place stood a more organic landscape and modernized living spaces that blended the home's historic character with contemporary design. Brody walked the grounds with Camden Walsh, pointing out the changes. At 11, the boy was slight for his age, a side effect of his treatments, but his mind was sharp and his questions perceptive. "Did you hate living here when you were a kid?" Camden asked, skipping a stone across the redesigned pond. "Not hate," Brody considered, "but I never felt it was truly home. More like a museum I wasn't allowed to touch. That's how it feels in my dad's apartment. When I visit." Camden's visits to Niles in prison were monthly, arranged by Brody through his attorneys. The boy deserved to know his father, even if that father was deeply flawed. "And how does it feel here?" Brody asked. Camden thought for a moment. "Bigger. Not just the space. Like there's room to be, whatever." Brody nodded, understanding precisely what the boy meant. In the months since establishing the Camden Walsh Foundation, he'd spent considerable time with Tamara and her son. What had begun as a strategic move, a public redemption narrative to counterbalance his ruthless takedown of Lawrence and Niles, had evolved into something more complex. Not friendship exactly, but connection. A mutual recognition of damage survived, of resilience forged through adversity. As they rounded the corner toward the main house, Margot approached, tablet in hand. "The contractor called about the guest house renovations," she reported. "They need decisions on the accessibility features by Friday." "Tell them to implement all of them," Brody replied. "The foundation retreat is scheduled for December, and several of the families have children in wheelchairs." "Will do." Margot smiled at Camden. "Your mom called. She's finished at the doctor's office and is heading back now. Can I show her the treehouse before we leave? Camden asked Brody. Of course. It's your treehouse, after all. As Camden ran ahead, Margot fell into step beside Brody. Preston called. The last of the civil suits against Porter Investments has been settled. The company is being dissolved. And the employees? As you requested, the foundation has offered positions to those not implicated in the fraud. 15 have accepted so far. Brody nodded. Another debt paid, this one to the innocent casualties of his revenge against Niles. There's something else, Margot added, her tone shifting. A letter arrived from France this morning. Brody stopped walking. My mother. Yes. And she's not just writing this time. Margot handed him an ivory envelope. She's coming back to the States. Next month. Brody turned the envelope over in his hands, but didn't open it. Since receiving Eleanor's first letter, they had exchanged sporadic correspondence. Careful, measured communications that acknowledged the past without attempting to rewrite it. But a return visit was unexpected. Why now, he wondered aloud. Perhaps you should read the letter, Margot suggested gently. Before he could respond, his phone rang. Townsend. We've found her, the investigator said without preamble. Veronica? Brody asked, moving away from Margot for privacy. Not exactly in Seattle anymore. She's in Portland. And she's not alone. Explain. She's pregnant. About 7 months along, from the looks of it. Brody felt a cold shock run through him. Niles. Timeline fits. But there's more. She's been meeting with a literary agent. Word is she's shopping a memoir. All about her marriage to you, the affair with Porter, and the dramatic showdown at the wedding. A book, Brody said flatly. She wants to cash in on the scandal. Appears that way. My source says the working title is Collateral Damage. Life in the crossfire of powerful men. Keep monitoring the situation. I want to know the moment she signs a deal. After hanging up, Brody found himself staring at the estate's main house, its stone facade catching the late afternoon sun. His grandfather had built it as a monument to his own success. Lawrence had maintained it as a museum to family mythology. And now Brody was transforming it into something else entirely. A space for healing, for rebuilding. The irony wasn't lost on him. His revenge, so meticulously planned and executed, continued to evolve in unexpected ways, sprouting new complications long after he'd considered the matter settled. That evening, after Tamara and Camden had left, Brody finally opened Eleanor's letter in the privacy of his study. Dear Broderick, I'm returning to the States next month for medical treatments. Nothing serious, just procedures better handled by my longtime doctors there. I'll be staying in the city for approximately 6 weeks. I've followed news of your foundation with interest and pride. Montgomery would have approved of how you've redirected the family resources towards something constructive rather than merely dynastic. I understand if you prefer to maintain our distance. But if you're amenable, I would like to see the estate again. Not as it was, but as you've made it. And perhaps, if you're willing, we might have dinner together one evening. There are things I'd like to tell you in person about the years before you were born, about Montgomery and Lawrence, and about choices that shaped our family long before you entered it. Not to excuse what happened later, but to complete the picture you've been assembling. With respect for whatever you decide, Eleanor. Brody set the letter aside, uncertain how to respond. 6 months ago, he would have rejected the overture outright. Now, the calculation was more complex. Eleanor had been both victim and accomplice in Lawrence's schemes, a distinction that had become more meaningful to Brody as he'd observed Tamara Walsh navigating the aftermath of Niles's deceptions. There were gradations of betrayal, it seemed, nuances of complicity. His phone chimed with a text from Catherine Shepard, hearing the news reports about the foundation. Montgomery would be proud. Dinner soon? Another connection formed in the wake of his revenge. Catherine had become something of a mentor, her perspective shaped by her own experience with Lawrence's vindictiveness, yet untainted by family entanglements. Next week, he replied, there have been developments. The following morning, Brody met with Preston Chambers at the attorney's downtown office. The wood-paneled space hadn't changed in 30 years, a constant in the shifting landscape of Brody's life. So Veronica plans to publish her story. Preston summarized after Brody explained Townsend's findings. Can we stop it legally? Probably not, unless she includes demonstrable falsehoods. Brody steepled his fingers. But we can certainly make it less attractive to publishers. How so? By controlling the narrative. Brody stood, pacing the office. The foundation has garnered positive press. My rehabilitation of the estate has been well received. What if we accelerate the next phase? Preston raised an eyebrow. The Medical Research Center? Exactly. We announce it now, with a major funding commitment and high-profile partnerships. The heartwarming story of Broderick Harlow's redemption drowns out whatever version of events Veronica is peddling. Cynical but effective, Preston noted. However, it puts you back in the public eye just as Eleanor is returning. Are you prepared for that convergence? Brody paused. You knew about my mother's plans? She consulted me about the legal implications of her return, given Lawrence's conviction. Attorney-client privilege prevented me from mentioning it. Of course. Brody resumed pacing. What's your assessment of her intentions? Preston removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. I've known Eleanor Harlow for 40 years, through her marriage to Lawrence and all that followed. In all that time, I've never seen her as unburdened as she appears now. He replaced his glasses. I believe her desire to reconnect with you is genuine. That doesn't mean it's wise. For either of us. Perhaps not. But wisdom and healing don't always travel the same path. Brody considered this. Draft the foundation announcement. Include details of the research center and the first round of grants. And Preston, make it compelling. The kind of story that makes Veronica's memoir look petty by comparison. As he left the attorney's office, Brody found himself thinking about the concept of narrative control, how it had been at the center of his revenge all along. Lawrence had controlled the family narrative for decades, casting himself as the rightful heir to Montgomery's legacy. Niles had controlled the narrative of his company, hiding its financial instability. Veronica had controlled the narrative of their marriage's demise, positioning herself as the victim. Brody's revenge had been, at its core, about wresting that control away from them, about exposing the truth beneath their carefully constructed stories. Now Veronica was attempting to reclaim that control through her memoir, and Brody found himself responding in kind, crafting a counter-narrative of redemption and philanthropy. When did it end? This battle for who got to tell the story? Back at his office, he found an unexpected visitor waiting, Tamara Walsh. This is a surprise, he said, gesturing her into his private office. Is Camden all right? He's fine. At school. Tamara settled into a chair, her expression serious. I came to talk about your mother. Brody stilled. What about her? She contacted me. Wants to meet Camden when she returns next month. Why would she? Brody began, then understanding dawned. She sees him as her grandson. Once removed, Tamara nodded. Niles's son. Her son's former partner's wife's husband's former business partner's son. She gave a small laugh. Convoluted, but in her mind, apparently a connection worth exploring. And how do you feel about that? Cautious. Which is why I'm here. Tamara leaned forward. I need to know if this is some new battlefield in your family war. If Camden would be caught in the crossfire. The war is over, Brody said, surprised to find he meant it. Lawrence is in prison. Niles is paying his debt to society. Whatever Eleanor wants with Camden, it's not about revenge. But you're still not sure if you'll see her yourself when she returns. It wasn't a question. Brody matched her directness. No, I'm not. Can I offer some unsolicited advice? Tamara didn't wait for permission. Forgiveness is overrated. Trust is earned. But closure? Closure is necessary. Meaning see her. Hear what she has to say. Then decide what role, if any, she has in your life going forward. Tamara stood. Your foundation has changed Camden's life. Given him hope, community, treatment options we never could have afforded. I owe you for that. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not. But I do know something about surviving relationships with difficult men. Your mother does too. She headed for the door. Just think about it. After she left, Brody found himself at the window, looking out over the city he had helped rebuild after his grandfather's death. Buildings he had designed stood alongside ones Montgomery had constructed decades earlier. Different styles, different purposes, but parts of the same evolving landscape. Was that what family could be? Not a static institution, but a landscape that changed with each generation, absorbing the impact of individual choices without being defined solely by them. He picked up his phone and composed a text to Eleanor. "I'll meet you when you return. The estate has changed. You should see it." Her reply came moments later. "Thank you, Broderick, for the chance to see it, and you, with clear eyes." That night, Brody added a new document to his reconstruction folder, plans for a reading room at the estate dedicated to Montgomery Harlow. Not a shrine to the past, but a bridge to the future, a space where Camden and other children from the foundation could discover the power of stories well told. Their own stories, not just those written for them by others. Chapter 8. The Reconciliation. Eleanor Harlow arrived on a Tuesday, the October light casting long shadows across the airport terminal. Brody waited at the arrival's gate, watching as passengers streamed past, searching for the familiar figure of his mother. When she appeared, he was struck by how much she had changed. The carefully maintained elegance remained, but the tension, that ever-present vigilance that had characterized her throughout his childhood, had dissipated. She moved differently, more freely, as if released from invisible constraints. She spotted him and paused, uncertainty crossing her features before she continued forward. "Broderick," she said simply. "Mother." He took her carry-on bag. "Welcome back." The drive to her hotel was filled with careful small talk, observations about the weather in France versus here, changes to the city skyline, the traffic patterns. Neutral territory, mapped and navigated with precision. "I've made a reservation for dinner," Brody said as they neared the hotel. "But if you're too tired after the flight, I'd like to see the estate first," Eleanor interrupted. "If that's all right." Before dinner. Brody hesitated, then nodded. Of course. The estate was quiet when they arrived, the afternoon staff having departed. Eleanor stood in the driveway, absorbing the changes, the modernized entrance, the redesigned gardens, the subtle but significant alterations to the facade. "It's not what I expected," she admitted as they walked toward the front door. "What did you expect? That you would have erased all traces of the past, made it unrecognizable. That would have given the past too much power." Brody unlocked the door. "This way honors what's worth keeping while discarding what wasn't." Inside, the transformation was more dramatic. Walls had been removed to create open, flowing spaces. The heavy antiques had been replaced with clean-lined furniture that nevertheless respected the home's architectural heritage. Photography and contemporary art hung where once stern Harlow ancestors had glowered from gilded frames. Eleanor moved through the rooms slowly, trailing her fingers along surfaces, pausing to study particular changes. In the library, now a bright, welcoming space rather than the dark enclave it had been, she stopped before a portrait of Montgomery that remained in its original position. "He would approve," she said softly. "Of all of it." "You think so?" "I know so." She turned to face him. "Your grandfather wasn't a traditionalist, Broderick. He was a pragmatist. He built what worked, discarded what didn't, and never confused loyalty to people with loyalty to outdated structures. You knew him better than I realized. There was a time, before Lawrence, when Montgomery and I were quite close. He recognized in me something Lawrence never did." "What was that?" "The capacity to adapt without breaking." Eleanor moved to the window. "It's what you have, too. What Lawrence always lacked." Brody studied his mother's profile, seeing her clearly perhaps for the first time, not as an extension of his father, not as the woman who had failed to protect him, but as a person who had navigated her own treacherous waters as best she could. "I've read about your foundation," she continued. "The work you're doing with children like Camden Walsh. It's redemptive." "It wasn't intended as redemption," Brody replied. "It began as strategy. But it's become more than that, hasn't it?" He didn't answer directly. "Camden and Tamara will be here this weekend. Camden mentioned you've been in contact." "Yes. I hope that's all right." Eleanor turned from the window. "I've had a great deal of time to think in France. About family. About what it means beyond blood. And what did you conclude? That it's about choice, about who we choose to include in our circle of care, regardless of biology or legal ties. She smiled faintly, something your father never understood. They continued through the house, eventually reaching the back terrace overlooking the redesigned landscape. The setting sun painted the grounds in gold and amber, softening the modern lines Brody had introduced to the traditional setting. I never thought I'd see this place again, Eleanor admitted. After everything that happened. Yet here you are. Yes, here I am. She turned to face him fully. I've come to make amends, Broderick, not to ask for forgiveness. I have no right to that, but to offer you the truth. The complete truth about our family, about Lawrence, about the choices I made that hurt you. Why now? Because for the first time in 40 years, I'm free to speak without fear. And because you deserve to understand, even if you never accept. Brody considered this. Dinner first, then truths. At the restaurant, a quiet, elegant space where privacy was assured, they ordered and then sat in momentary silence, the weight of decades between them. Start at the beginning, Brody finally said. Not with your letter, not with the divorce, with how it all began. Eleanor took a steadying breath. I met your father at a fundraiser for the symphony. I was 22, just graduated, working for an art gallery. He was 34, already successful, already living in Montgomery's shadow, and already resentful, Brody added. Yes, though I didn't recognize it then. I saw ambition, determination, charm. She sipped her water. We married quickly, too quickly. Within 6 months, I realized I had made a terrible mistake, but by then, I was pregnant with you. Brody's surprise must have shown on his face. You were born almost exactly 9 months after our wedding, Eleanor clarified. Lawrence insisted on keeping the pregnancy quiet at first. Concerned about appearances, he said. In truth, I think he was unsure about fatherhood, about adding another complication to his already strained relationship with Montgomery. What was the source of that strain? I never understood it fully. Montgomery recognized Lawrence's fundamental character flaw early on, his inability to build lasting relationships, to consider others' needs alongside his own. The greater Lawrence's success in business, the more Montgomery sought to limit his authority within the family companies. It drove Lawrence to increasingly risky ventures to prove his worth, including his partnership with Robert Shepard. Eleanor nodded, pain crossing her features. Robert was everything Lawrence wasn't. Ethical, collaborative, genuinely concerned with creating something lasting. Their partnership was successful precisely because of Robert's qualities, but Lawrence couldn't stand that the credit was shared. So he destroyed Shepard. And later, when evidence emerged suggesting Lawrence's involvement in Shepard's death, I couldn't deny it anymore. Eleanor's voice had dropped to just above a whisper. I couldn't pretend we were simply a family with normal problems. I knew I was married to a man capable of terrible things. Yet you stayed. I stayed for you at first. Then out of fear, Lawrence made it clear what would happen if I tried to leave. And finally, out of a kind of numb resignation, she met his gaze directly. Until your divorce from Veronica, when you sided with her, when I saw myself in her. Another woman Lawrence was manipulating for his own purposes. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her glass. He discovered her affair with Niles months before you did. He was using that knowledge to pressure Niles financially while simultaneously encouraging Veronica to leave you in the most damaging way possible. Brody stilled. What? It was punishment, Broderick, for you becoming Montgomery's heir, for succeeding where Lawrence felt he had been denied opportunity. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I tried to warn you in my own inadequate way, but by then, our relationship was so strained and my own complicity so complete that you couldn't hear me. The waiter arrived with their meals, creating a momentary reprieve from the intensity of the conversation. Neither made more than a pretense of eating. Why did you agree to the wedding at the estate? Brody asked when they were alone again. You must have known how I would react. I opposed it initially, but Lawrence threatened to contest the trust entirely, to drag the entire family through court for years. In my weakness, I thought perhaps if I supported the wedding, I could contain the damage. Eleanor set down her fork. I was wrong. I failed you again. The raw honesty in her voice reached something in Brody that had remained armored for years. Not softening, exactly, but a recognition of shared wounds. What do you want from me now? He asked. After all this time, all these revelations. Nothing you don't wish to give. Eleanor's response was immediate. I've made my peace with the possibility that our relationship may never heal. That the damage is too extensive, the betrayal too profound. Then why return at all? Why reach out to Camden to me? Because healing happens in the light, not in shadow. Because secrets protected Lawrence, not his victims. She reached across the table, not quite touching him. And because you are my son, and despite every failure, every mistake, I have always loved you. The declaration hung between them, neither accepted nor rejected. Later, as he drove Eleanor back to her hotel, Brody found himself thinking about narratives again. How his mother's revelations had shifted the story he'd constructed about his parents' marriage, about Veronica's betrayal, about his own place in the family saga. Not erasing his pain or justifying their actions, but adding dimension, context. Will you be seeing Camden this weekend? He asked as they neared the hotel. If you and Tamara are comfortable with it. Camden sets his own boundaries these days. He's quite clear about who he wants in his life. Brody pulled up to the entrance. But I think he'd like to meet you. And you? Will I see you again before I leave? Brody considered the question. The foundation is holding a fundraiser next weekend at the estate. A relatively small gathering. Donors, medical researchers, families from the program. He met her gaze. You'd be welcome to attend, if you're feeling up to it after your treatments. Eleanor's smile was tentative but genuine. I like that very much. As she exited the car, Brody found himself saying, the guest house has been renovated. If you'd prefer to stay closer to your doctors, it's available. The offer surprised them both. Eleanor recovered first. Thank you, Broderick. I'll consider it. That night, Brody added another document to his reconstruction folder, a family tree, not of the Harlow bloodline, but of the connections he'd formed since executing his revenge. Camden and Tamara, Catherine Shepard, the families served by the foundation. And now, possibly Eleanor, not restored to her former place, but finding a new one in the reconfigured landscape of his life. The weekend arrived with perfect fall weather, the estate grounds ablaze with autumn colors. Camden led Eleanor on a tour of his favorite spots, the treehouse, the pond, the reading room dedicated to Montgomery. Watching them from the terrace, Brody was struck by the easy way Camden interacted with Eleanor, without the weight of history that characterized Brody's own relationship with his mother. He's good for her, Tamara observed, joining Brody. And I think she might be good for him, too. You're not concerned about her influence? Camden needs more positive adults in his life, not fewer. Especially now that he's processing who his father really is. Tamara glanced at Brody. Besides, I've vetted her thoroughly. Former art gallery director, patron of 3 children's charities in France. No criminal record. Brody raised an eyebrow. You investigated my mother? Of course I did. I investigate everyone who wants access to my son. Tamara smiled. Just like you would. The observation was accurate. In the months since establishing the foundation, Brody had developed protocols for everyone involved with the children. Background checks, reference verifications, ongoing monitoring. She's not who I thought she was, he admitted. None of them were exactly. That's the thing about people. They're always more complex than our stories about them. Tamara watched as Camden showed Eleanor a butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower. Even the ones who hurt us. Later that evening, after Tamara and Camden had left and Eleanor had retired to the guest house, Brody sat in Montgomery's reading room, surrounded by the books his grandfather had collected throughout his life. Business texts and architectural journals, certainly, but also philosophy, history, even poetry, the collection of a man whose interests extended far beyond the empire he had built. Brody's phone chimed with a message from Preston. Veronica's book deal fell through. Publisher concerned about legal exposure and negative publicity given your foundation's recent press. Thought you'd want to know. Another victory, albeit a small one. Yet it felt different from the satisfaction of Lawrence's sentencing or Niles's downfall. Less triumphant, more like closing a door on a draft that had been chilling a room for too long. He was about to put away his phone when another message arrived, this one from Townsend. Interesting development. Veronica's baby came early. Healthy girl. Niles doesn't know yet. A child. Another innocent drawn into the complex web of their shared history. Before he could process this new information, a soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Eleanor stood in the doorway, looking tentative. I couldn't sleep, she explained. Too many memories in this house. Good ones or bad? Both. Neither. She gestured to the bookshelves. I haven't been in this room since before Montgomery died. He used to let me borrow books when Lawrence was traveling. Said I was the only one besides you who appreciated them properly. Brody indicated the chair opposite his. You can still borrow them, if you'd like. Eleanor sat, her gaze taking in the transformed space. The foundation fundraiser next weekend. What will my role be? Whatever you're comfortable with. You can simply attend as a guest. Or, if you prefer, you could help with the art auction portion. Given your background, I'd like that. Eleanor hesitated. There's something else I wanted to discuss with you. About the future. Go on. I've been offered a position back at the gallery where I worked before marrying Lawrence. Part-time, consulting on acquisitions. Her hands twisted in her lap, a nervous gesture Brody remembered from childhood. If I accept, I'd be returning to the States permanently. The implications were clear. She wasn't just visiting. She was considering rebuilding her life here. Near him, near the estate, near Camden. What would you need from me? Brody asked. Nothing material. I have the settlement from the divorce and my family's trust. Eleanor looked up, meeting his gaze directly. But I would need to know that my presence wouldn't be unwelcome, that we could continue this careful rebuilding. Brody thought of Veronica, alone with a newborn daughter, of Niles in prison, unaware he had a second child, of Lawrence, serving his sentence as an old man who would likely die before release. The wreckage of his revenge was extensive, the collateral damage reaching further than he had anticipated. Was there value in salvaging what could be saved? In allowing for the possibility of reconstruction, not just of buildings and foundations, but of human connections? I think, he said slowly, that Montgomery would say there's room enough on the landscape for both of us to build our lives. Separately, but not disconnected. Eleanor's relief was visible. That sounds like him. Practical, yet profound. One condition, Brody added. Complete transparency going forward. No more secrets. No more protected narratives. Agreed. Eleanor leaned forward. Starting with this. Veronica contacted me last week. Brody stilled. About what? Her baby. A little girl named Lily. Born premature, but healthy. Eleanor paused. She asked if I would tell you. Said she thought you should know, given everything. Niles is the father. Yes, though he doesn't know yet. Veronica is uncertain about informing him. About what role, if any, he should have in the child's life. Brody absorbed this, thinking of Camden, a boy who had grown up with a father who was present yet absent, involved yet detached. And now Lily, who might grow up with no father at all. What did you tell her? He asked. That decisions about children should be made with their welfare in mind, not as weapons or shields in adult conflicts. Eleanor met his gaze, and that you were not the monster she had painted in her book proposal. You knew about the book? Catherine told me. We've been in contact these past months. At Brody's surprised expression, she added she was Robert's wife. I owed her my own truths about what happened. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Another connection formed in the aftermath of destruction. Veronica needs financial support. Eleanor continued. The settlement from your divorce is depleted. She's considering reaching out to you directly. For money. For guidance, I think. On navigating a world where her child's father is incarcerated and her own reputation is complicated. Brody thought of the foundation, of its mission to support children affected by circumstances beyond their control. Had he established it only for Camden, only as a strategic counterbalance to his revenge? Or did it represent something more fundamental? A recognition that the future belonged not to those who won the battles of the past, but to those who built what came next? Tell her I'll meet with her, he decided. Not about money. About establishing a trust for Lily. Similar to what we've done for Camden. You do that? After everything. The child is innocent. Like Camden. Brody stood, moving to the window that overlooked the estate gardens, now silvered with moonlight. And perhaps it's time to close the accounts, one way or another. Eleanor joined him at the window. Montgomery used to stand right here, looking out at the estate. Planning, always planning. What would he make of all this, do you think? The revenge, the aftermath, the foundation? He would say that destruction is easy, that true power lies in creation. Eleanor smiled faintly, and then he would tell you to look forward, not back, that the view ahead is always more interesting than the one behind. Brody considered this as they stood in companionable silence, the moonlight casting their shadows onto the floor of the reading room. Two figures, separate yet connected, each carrying the marks of the past while facing toward what came next. The fundraiser next weekend, he said finally. I think we should announce a new initiative. A scholarship program for children of incarcerated parents, starting with Lily Porter. Eleanor's surprise was evident. That's more generous than anyone would expect. It's not about generosity. It's about building something that outlasts the damage. Brody turned from the window. That's what Montgomery would do. Yes, Eleanor agreed softly. That's exactly what he would do. As she bid him good night and returned to the guest house, Brody remained in the reading room, surrounded by his grandfather's books, by the wisdom of a man who had understood that empires rose and fell, but legacies, true legacies, were measured not in conquest, but in what remained standing after the dust settled. He opened his laptop and created a new folder, Legacy. Inside, he began drafting plans for the scholarship program, for expanded foundation initiatives, for a future that acknowledged the past without being constrained by it. The revenge was complete. The reconstruction had begun, and the legacy, his legacy, was yet to be written. Chapter 9. The Resolution. 1 year to the day after the fateful wedding that never was, the Harlow estate hosted a very different gathering. Under white tents spread across the autumn-painted lawn, families mingled with medical researchers, donors conversed with foundation staff, and children, at the center of it all, played on grounds that had once been forbidden to young feet. Brody moved through the crowd, greeting guests with a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with the calculated charm Lawrence had wielded or the forceful presence Montgomery had projected. This was something entirely his own, a gravitas born of destruction and rebuilding, of revenge executed and transcended. In a quiet corner of the main tent, Eleanor had organized an art auction featuring works donated by galleries and artists she had known throughout her career. She had returned to the States permanently 6 months earlier, taking the position at her former gallery and establishing a small apartment downtown. Their relationship remained careful, defined by clear boundaries and mutual respect rather than the unconditional forgiveness she had never asked for and he had never offered. Not reconciliation in the traditional sense, but reconstruction of a different kind. The Kensington Foundation just pledged another $1 million, Margot reported, appearing at his side with her ever-present tablet. That puts us over the target for the Medical Research Center. Good. Make sure to acknowledge them prominently in the press release. Brody scanned the gathering. Any word from Tamara and Camden? They're on their way. Camden had a treatment this morning, but he insisted on coming afterward. And Veronica arrived 10 minutes ago. She's in the guest house with the baby, getting settled. Veronica's inclusion in the foundation event had been controversial. Preston had advised against it, citing potential media complications. Catherine had supported it, recognizing the value of closing circles. In the end, the decision had been practical. Lily Porter was now a beneficiary of the foundation's programs, and her presence, along with her mother's, was appropriate regardless of the complicated history. Sir, Townsend approached, as discreet as ever despite the festive setting. There's a situation you should be aware of. What kind of situation? Lawrence Harlow has been granted a compassionate release. Terminal illness, apparently. He is 6 months, maybe less. The news rippled through Brody like a stone dropped in still water. Where's he now? Being processed out. He'll be under house arrest at his brother's place upstate. Brody nodded, absorbing this unexpected development. Lawrence, once so powerful, reduced to spending his final days as a guest in his estranged brother's home. The symmetry was difficult to ignore. Does my mother know? Not yet. I thought you should be informed first. Thank you. I'll tell her myself. As Townsend departed, Brody caught sight of Tamara and Camden entering the main tent. The boy moved more confidently now, his medical treatments having stabilized his condition enough for him to participate in a modified sports program the Foundation had established. He spotted Brody and waved, breaking away from his mother to approach. "Did you see the Treehouse Village designs?" Camden asked without preamble. "The architect sent them over yesterday." "I did. Your input was invaluable." Brody had included Camden in the planning for the Foundation's latest initiative, a residential program for children requiring extended treatments, featuring accessible tree houses connected by elevated walkways. "Mom says I might be able to stay there sometimes, when she has to travel for the Foundation." Tamara had joined the organization 6 months earlier, heading up a parent advocacy program that was already gaining national recognition. Her insight, like Camden's, had proven invaluable to the evolving mission. "That's the idea," Brody confirmed. "A home away from home when families need it." Camden's expression grew serious. "I met Lily yesterday, at Dr. Brennan's office." "Did you? What did you think of her?" "She's small, but Mom says I was small too." The boy fidgeted with his jacket sleeve. "She's my sister, right? Since we have the same dad." Brody chose his words carefully. "Half-sister, technically, but family isn't always about technical definitions." "That's what Mom says." Camden looked across the tent to where Tamara was speaking with Eleanor. "Is Lily going to live here? At the estate?" "No. She and her mother have their own place. But they'll be involved with the Foundation, just like you and your mom." Camden nodded, processing this. "Is my dad ever getting out of prison?" "Yes, eventually, but not for several years." "Will I still be part of the Foundation when he does?" "Will Lily?" The question revealed the boy's underlying concern, that the connections he'd formed, the community he'd found, might be contingent on the complicated relationships of the adults around him. "Camden," Brody said, crouching to meet the boy's eye level, "the Foundation exists for you and children like you, not because of who your father is or what happened between the adults in your life. That will never change, no matter what else does." The boy's relief was evident. "Good, because I'm designing a new wing for the Treehouse Village. For teenagers. Already thinking ahead to your own needs?" Brody smiled. "Someone has to." Camden shrugged with the pragmatism of a child who had grown up too quickly. Adults are too busy dealing with the past. "Out of the mouths of babes," as the saying went. Brody straightened, watching as Camden rejoined his mother and Eleanor, the three of them forming a tableau that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. Across the lawn, he spotted Veronica emerging from the guest house, a baby carrier in her arms. She paused, scanning the gathering as if unsure of her welcome despite the formal invitation. Preston intercepted her, escorting her toward the refreshment tent with professional courtesy. The sight of Veronica with her daughter, Niles's daughter, still evoked complicated emotions. Not the white-hot anger of betrayal that had fueled his revenge, but something more nuanced, a recognition of shattered things partially mended, of cycles broken and continued. Veronica had relocated to the city 6 months earlier, after her financial situation had become desperate. The failed book deal, combined with mounting medical bills from Lily's premature birth, had left her with few options. Brody's offer of a trust for Lily, administered by the Foundation with strict conditions, had been a lifeline she couldn't refuse. Those conditions were non-negotiable. Veronica would have no direct access to the funds. She would sign a legally binding agreement never to attempt another memoir or public account of their marriage. And most importantly, she would acknowledge, in writing, the full extent of her betrayal during their marriage. It had been humbling for her, necessary for him. Now she stood at the periphery of the Foundation gathering, a tolerated presence because of her daughter, not welcome in her own right. The symmetry wasn't lost on Brody. Once he had been the outsider at his own property, watching as others claimed what was rightfully his. The difference was that his exile had been unjust. Hers was earned. Margot appeared at his side again. "It's almost time for your speech. Is everything set for the announcement?" "Yes. The board has approved the new scholarship program and the expanded medical research funding. The press release goes out the moment you finish speaking." Brody nodded, his gaze still on Veronica and her daughter. "And the other matter?" "The documents were delivered to Lawrence this morning." Preston confirmed receipt. The other matter was perhaps Brody's most calculated move yet. Upon learning of his father's terminal diagnosis and compassionate release, he had drafted a comprehensive agreement. In exchange for signing over his remaining assets to the foundation and recording a full confession of his crimes, including his role in Robert Shepard's death, Lawrence would receive top-tier medical care for his final months. Not forgiveness. Never that. But a final accounting that served Brody's purposes while acknowledging the inevitable. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston announced from a small stage that had been erected on the lawn, "if I could have your attention, Broderick Harlow would like to say a few words." The gathering quieted as Brody made his way to the stage. He surveyed the crowd, the families whose lives had been transformed by the foundation, the medical researchers whose work it funded, the donors whose contributions made it all possible. At the edges stood those connected to his revenge. Catherine Shepard, dignified in her vindication. Tamara and Camden, finding purpose in the aftermath. Eleanor, cautiously rebuilding a life independent of Lawrence's shadow. And Veronica, holding her daughter, a living testament to the complexity of consequences. 1 year ago, Brody began, this property was the site of a very different gathering. One built on deception, manipulation, and greed. His gaze swept over the crowd. Today, we gather for a different purpose. Not to celebrate unions based on lies, but to forge connections based on truth. Not to take, but to give. Not to destroy, but to build. He outlined the foundation's achievements over the past year. The medical treatments funded, the research advanced, the family supported. He announced the new scholarship program for children of incarcerated parents, with Lily Porter as its first recipient. And finally, he revealed the expanded medical research center that would be built on a portion of the estate grounds. Montgomery Harlow built an empire on steel and concrete, he concluded. But his true legacy wasn't in the buildings that bore his name. It was in his understanding that power without purpose is meaningless. That wealth without impact is hollow. That revenge without reconstruction is empty. The applause was genuine, the response enthusiastic. As Brody stepped down from the stage, he was surrounded by well-wishers and congratulations. Through the crowd, he caught Eleanor's eye, her nod of approval subtle but significant. Later, as the event wound down and guests began to depart, Brody found himself alone on the estate's upper terrace, looking out over the grounds now golden in the setting sun. Footsteps behind him announced Veronica's approach. "That was quite a speech," she said, Lily sleeping in a carrier against her chest. "Especially coming from a man who orchestrated one of the most comprehensive acts of revenge I've ever witnessed." Brody didn't turn. "Is there something you need, Veronica?" "Clarity." She moved to stand beside him, careful to maintain distance. "I've been trying to understand you. The man who destroyed his ex-wife's new marriage in spectacular fashion, who sent his father to prison, who systematically dismantled his former partner's life, and who then established a foundation that will help thousands of children, including the daughter of the man who betrayed him. Understanding isn't necessary. Acceptance of the reality is sufficient. The reality being that you haven't forgiven any of us. That all this," she gestured toward the foundation event below, "isn't about redemption. It's about control. Your control." Brody finally turned to face her. "You're half right. I haven't forgiven. Not you. Not Niles, not Lawrence. Forgiveness implies that what was broken can be mended, that what was taken can be returned. Some betrayals go too deep for that. And the foundation, Camden, my daughter, are separate from the accounting." Brody's expression remained impassive. "The innocent don't pay for the sins of the guilty in my world, but neither do the guilty escape consequences. And what are my ongoing consequences, Brody? Besides the financial restrictions, the legal gag order, the public humiliation. Living with yourself, Veronica. Living with the knowledge of what you did and what it cost you. His tone wasn't cruel, merely matter of fact. Just as I live with the knowledge of what I did in response. Do you regret any of it? The scorched earth approach? The collateral damage? Brody, consider the question. Regret implies I would choose differently if given another chance. I wouldn't. Every action I took was proportional to the betrayal that preceded it. Veronica shifted Lily, who stirred slightly in her sleep. And if someday she asks about her father, about what happened between all of us, then you'll tell her the truth. That her father made choices. That those choices had consequences. That despite those choices, she is loved and provided for. Brody's gaze softened slightly as it fell on the sleeping infant. And that while the accounts between her parents and me are forever closed, hers remains open. Her own to write. It was as much grace as he could offer, not for Veronica or Niles, but for the child who carried their blood without their guilt. I'm leaving, Veronica said suddenly. Not the city, but this circle. Once Lily is old enough for preschool, I've been offered a teaching position on the West Coast. The foundation support will continue regardless of geography, Preston assured me. That's correct. I thought you should know that I'm removing myself from your orbit permanently, not just because of the legal agreements, but because it's best. For Lily. For me. She straightened her shoulders. And maybe, though you won't admit it, for you too. Brody didn't contradict her. Goodbye, Veronica. As she walked away, Lily still sleeping peacefully against her chest, Brody felt no closure, no sense of a chapter ending. Only the quiet certainty that the accounts had been settled. That justice, by his definition, had been served. Catherine Shepard joined him on the terrace, her presence a counterpoint to Veronica's departure. Quite a transformation, she observed, looking out over the estate. Both of the property and its owner. Not as much of the latter as some might think. No, Catherine smiled knowingly. The Broderick Harlow who orchestrated that wedding disaster a year ago wouldn't have established a trust for his enemy's child. Wouldn't have offered medical care to a dying father who betrayed him. Wouldn't have allowed his mother a path back to connection. Those actions serve my purposes. Of course they do, just as revenge did. Catherine's assessment was shrewd, but not unkind. The difference is that your purposes have evolved, expanded beyond the settling of accounts to the building of legacy. Below them, Camden had climbed the largest oak tree on the property, waving excitedly to Tamara, who watched from below. Eleanor stood nearby, her conversation with several foundation donors animated and engaged. Preston and Margot conferred over tablets, already planning the next phase of the foundation's growth. Robert used to say that Montgomery Harlow was the most pragmatic man he'd ever met, Catherine continued. That he understood the difference between winning battles and winning wars. And which am I doing, in your estimation? Neither. You're building an empire. Her assessment was matter of fact. Not of steel and concrete like your grandfather, but of influence and impact. The ultimate repudiation of those who betrayed you. Brody considered this. There was truth in Catherine's observation. His revenge had been comprehensive and exacting. But what followed wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. It was strategic reconstruction. Building something that would long outlast the battles that had necessitated it. The documents from Lawrence, Catherine asked, changing the subject. Will he sign them? He already has. Faced with the choice between a dignified end with superior care or a painful decline in his brother's spare bedroom, Lawrence chose pragmatism, as I knew he would. And the confession about Robert, recorded this morning. Preston has the footage. It will be sufficient to formally clear Robert's name, to establish Lawrence's culpability beyond question. Catherine closed her eyes briefly. Decades of suspicion finally confirmed. Justice long delayed finally within reach. Thank you. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the estate grounds, Townsend approached with his final report of the day. Niles Porter received the DNA results confirming Lily is his daughter, he informed Brody. He's requested visitation rights. Through the prison's family program? Yes. Supervised visits only, of course. Brody nodded. Inform Preston. The Foundation won't oppose it, so long as Veronica consents and the visits are deemed in Lily's best interest by child development specialists. Understood. Townsend hesitated. There's one more thing. Lawrence is asking to see you. The request was unexpected. Brody had assumed their final communication would be through lawyers and signed documents. When, at your convenience, he's been admitted to the medical facility as agreed. Brody considered the request. To see his father one last time. Not for reconciliation, not for forgiveness, but for what? Closure? Understanding? Or simply to witness the final diminishment of a man who had once seemed invincible? I'll think about it, he decided. That night, alone in the study that had once been Montgomery's, Brody reviewed the day's events. The Foundation launch had been an unqualified success. The new initiatives had been well received. The complex web of relationships he now maintained, with Eleanor, with Tamara and Camden, with Catherine, with the Foundation families, functioned smoothly within clearly defined boundaries. The revenge was complete. The reconstruction well underway. What remained was the legacy, the long game that would extend beyond his lifetime. He opened his laptop to the legacy folder and added a new document, plans for a memorial garden on the estate grounds. Not dedicated to Montgomery or any Harlow, but to the children served by the Foundation who didn't survive their illnesses. A place of remembrance, of acknowledgement that not all battles could be won, not all accounts balanced. As he worked, Brody felt no softening toward those who had betrayed him. Lawrence, Niles, and Veronica remained in his mind exactly what they were, enemies who had received justice proportional to their crimes. The accounts were settled, not forgiven. The ledger balanced, not erased. But alongside that unwavering assessment existed something new. A recognition that the most powerful response to betrayal wasn't merely its punishment, but the creation of something the betrayers could never have imagined or achieved. Not forgiveness, but transcendence. Not reconciliation, but reconstruction on a scale that rendered the original treachery small by comparison. Montgomery would have approved. 1 week later, Brody stood in a private room at the medical facility where Lawrence was spending his final days. His father lay in a hospital bed, diminished by illness, the once commanding presence reduced to fragile mortality. "You came," Lawrence observed, his voice weaker than Brody had anticipated. "I came to ensure the accounts are fully settled." Brody remained standing, maintaining both physical and emotional distance. "The confession has been verified. Catherine Shepard will finally have justice for her husband." Lawrence closed his eyes briefly. "Always the accountant of wrongs. Just like Montgomery. You forfeited the right to criticize either of us decades ago." "Perhaps." Lawrence's gaze found Brody's, surprisingly clear despite his condition. "I want to ask for forgiveness. We both know better than that." "Then why ask me to come?" "To tell you that you've won. More completely than I ever anticipated." A rattling breath. "The Foundation. The estate. Eleanor. Even Veronica and her child. You've achieved what I never could. A legacy that will outlast you. This isn't about winning, isn't it?" A ghost of Lawrence's old calculating smile appeared. "We're more alike than you care to admit, Broderick. The difference is that you've succeeded where I failed, built where I destroyed." Brody didn't respond to the comparison. "Is that all?" "No." Lawrence shifted in the bed, wincing with the effort. "I want you to know that I've made provisions. A separate account, unknown to the prosecutors or the estate attorneys. 5 million, untraceable. For what purpose? Insurance. Against the day when you might find yourself in need of funds outside the Foundation's legitimate channels." Lawrence's expression was knowing. A man in your position, with your particular approach to justice, might someday require resources that can't be tracked. Brody understood immediately. His father was offering a final legacy, not of reconciliation, but of pragmatic acknowledgement that sometimes justice required operating in the shadows. The account details? With Preston, in a sealed envelope to be delivered after my death. Lawrence's breathing had become more labored. "Consider it my final acknowledgement of who you are, who we both are. Brody studied his father, the man who had shaped him through both example and opposition, who had taught him, through betrayal, the value of vigilance, who had shown him, through cruelty, the importance of measured response. Goodbye, father. As he left the medical facility, Brody felt no grief, no closure, no emotional resolution. Only the cool certainty that the accounts would soon be permanently closed, the ledger finally balanced in full. 3 days later, Lawrence Harlow died in his sleep. The official announcement mentioned his contributions to the business community and his family's long history in the region. It made no mention of his crimes, his imprisonment, or the foundation that now controlled his former assets. At the small, private memorial service, attended by only a handful of people, Brody stood beside Eleanor, not in reconciliation, but in acknowledgement of a shared history now concluded. Catherine Shepard attended as well, her presence a testament not to forgiveness, but to justice finally served. Afterward, as they left the chapel, Eleanor touched Brody's arm briefly. "It's over now," she said. "Truly over." Yes. But even as he agreed, Brody knew that what had ended was merely one chapter. What continued? The foundation, the legacy, the careful reconstruction of connections on his terms, would extend far beyond Lawrence's death. That evening, Preston delivered the sealed envelope Lawrence had mentioned. Inside were indeed account details for a substantial sum, hidden away by a man who had understood the value of resources beyond official scrutiny. Brody transferred the funds to a new account, one that would not appear in any foundation records, any personal financial statements. Not for his own enrichment, but as a resource of last resort if his carefully constructed world ever faced unforeseen threats. Not forgiveness of Lawrence's sins, but acceptance of his final offering. 6 months later, on a clear spring morning, Brody stood on the newly completed observation deck overlooking the Foundation's campus. What had once been simply the Harlow estate now expanded to include the Medical Research Center, the residential treatment facility with Camden's Treehouse Village, and the Memorial Garden in full bloom. Margot joined him, tablet in hand as always. The first residential patients move in next week. Camden has volunteered to be their official tour guide. Of course he has. Brody allowed himself a small smile. The boy, now 12, had become the unofficial ambassador of the Foundation, his resilience and candor making him uniquely suited to welcome other children into the community. "We've received an interesting proposal," Margot continued. "From Veronica, actually. She's completed her teaching certification and has developed a creative arts therapy program for children with chronic conditions. She's offering it to the Foundation for implementation here." "On what terms?" "She would consult remotely. No presence on campus required. All materials and training provided digitally." Brody considered the proposal. It was well-crafted, allowing the Foundation to benefit from Veronica's expertise without requiring her physical presence, maintaining the separation he had established while utilizing a resource that could benefit the children. Have the program evaluated on its merits, he decided. If it meets our standards, implement it. But maintain the separation protocols. She doesn't set foot on the property. Understood. Margot made a note. One last thing. Eleanor asked about Camden's birthday next month. She's commissioned a painting for him, a landscape of the Treehouse Village. Wanted to make sure it wouldn't conflict with any other gifts you had planned. It doesn't. Brody had arranged for a state-of-the-art adaptive gaming system that would allow Camden to play despite his physical limitations. Tell her it's appropriate. As Margot left, Brody remained at the observation point, surveying what he had built from the ashes of betrayal. Not a simple charitable foundation, but a complex ecosystem of care, research, and support that would continue long after he was gone. He had not forgiven. The betrayals remained acknowledged and accounted for. The separation between himself and those who had wronged him maintained with careful precision. Veronica remained excluded from his physical space. Niles remained in prison, facing the consequences of his actions. Lawrence had died without reconciliation. Even Eleanor existed in his life within carefully defined boundaries. But alongside that unforgiveness existed creation, construction, legacy. The accounts were settled, the ledger balanced. Justice, by his definition, had been served. And in that perfect balance, neither forgiveness nor continued vengeance, but calculated reconstruction on his terms, Broderick Harlow had achieved what his grandfather would have recognized as the ultimate victory, not merely surviving betrayal, but transcending it. Building an empire where the betrayers became footnotes in a story that continued long after their chapters had closed. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.